My name is Anime Night, and I did my EPQ on the question, was the Southern or Northern Renaissance the more revolutionary artistic movement? Why the Southern and Northern Renaissance? Well, art has always been quite a large part of my life, despite not having an urge to create myself, nor much, artistic talent. I've always had a keen interest in it. This may have stemmed from my mum taking me to galleries throughout my childhood. I decided to make art my project's focus due to its subjective nature. I've never been entirely fond of quantitative subjects since there tends to be little room for debate, whereas in art, the freedom of interpretation, I argue, is unrivaled by any other humanities. Although a composer, Felix Mendelssohn's approach that art and life are not separate things also reveals partly why I chose art for my EPQ. My question allowed me to explore contextual factors and events of the time, which is perfect because of my love of history. A final reason why I chose this topic is because of the Northern Renaissance being a widely unknown movement. The Renaissance as we know it was in fact two separate movements, one originating in the Holy Roman Empire and the more commonly understood Southern Renaissance, which is believed to have originated in Florence. So you could say I have a sort of duty to inform others of the splendors and the great achievements that also occurred up north in this time of upheaval. Next slide. To satisfactorily answer this question, the meaning of revolutionary had to be established. In this essay, revolutionary is measured by the extent practices and beliefs of art changed from the previous medieval period. With the church as the main patron, art journalist Bettany Hughes argues that the early church was in fact a master of anti-intellectualism, iconoclasm, and mortal prejudice, all of which resulted in stifling intolerance. The church maintained a repulsion towards pieces of knowledge that emulated paganism. This resulted in the high artistic standards established by the ancient Greek and Roman civilizations being rejected and discontinued. This resulted in simplistic art, which was devoid of dimension and natural proportion. So you can see on the far left, it's not as anatomically accurate as you'd say with the statue on the right. Artists were therefore not motivated by the classical standards of realism, but by religion and symbolism. On to the next point. I focused on this time frame due to Giotto di Bordone. He's arguably the first great Renaissance artist emerging around the beginning of the 14th century. Here on the top right, we can see his adoration of the Magi, where he utilizes the skill of both buon and secco techniques for his fresco painting. We can consider this period to be the first of the Renaissance, since it was the beginning of artists rediscovering old techniques and experimenting with art. In this project, I aim to reach a conclusion to this query through exploring various artistic movements that emerged, as well as contextual factors. The contextual factors I explored throughout my EPQ included the influence of the Catholic Church and Protestantism, the development in new techniques and methods, and key and influential individuals in both the Southern and Northern Renaissance. By key and influential individuals, I both include artists and patrons. The various artistic movements which I explored included both visual and literary realism, which both originated in the South and moved up north. Here in Bellini's Madonna and Child, it is an example of visual realism. The baby Jesus is as palpable here as a real little boy, and the atomically fine detail of his stocky legs and swollen stomach also evoke realism. Furthermore, Mary is depicted as equally alive, vibrant, and bestowed with attractive features. Visual realism demonstrates the desire of many patrons during the Southern Renaissance to bridge the gap between the earthly and heavenly realms. You can see the difference in the medieval Madonna and Child here. It's less anatomically accurate. While Buonagida's The Crucifixion here is an example of literary realism. Christ is depicted with naturalism, and his Buonagida chooses to depict Christ's suffering explicitly. We can see blood streaming from his limp body, and his eyes are closed, which contrasted with the medieval depiction of crucifixion, where Christ is almost seen as triumphant over death and his suffering being almost admitted. Through this realism, does Buonagida provide worshippers with an ability to relate to his suffering and hence form a closer relationship with the divine. In this EPQ, I reached a conclusion that the Southern Renaissance was the more revolutionary of the two. This wasn't a simple conclusion for me to reach. Overall, both movements progressed greatly from the intolerance and prejudice of the medieval period. In the development of technology and techniques, there's little to distinguish between the advances of the Northern and Southern Renaissance. The commendable development of Gutenberg's printing press and from up north, and Brussolini's perspective drawing, both from down south, both significantly revolutionized the way art was created and distributed. So the conclusion for my EPQ lied within the changing attitudes and values of art. I chose the South because the North simply lacked the ambition to utilize art as a vehicle for social change and improvement. It was the unfaltering ambition of the Southern Renaissance to better the population that established it as the more revolutionary. The South concerned itself with the sanity, vigor, and happiness of the whole population. Opulence and beauty were no longer preserved for the rich and privileged within society. Opening art and culture to the general population was the beginning of true revolution. Initially, in this project, I thought of doing my EPQ on the development of art from antiquity to the post-World War II modern movement. I soon found out this was not feasible in 5,000 words, and in covering such a vast period of time, I would have to sacrifice going into depth and analysing certain arguments and factors. While I still had this idea, I was researching into the Renaissance when I came across the BBC documentary, The Northern Renaissance. I found this very interesting, mainly due to my own ignorance of how there was an entirely different and separate movement up north. It wasn't just Italy who had a monopoly on experimentation with the subjects and techniques of art. Covering the Southern and Northern Renaissance was far more feasible in the world limit that had been given, and it was a broad enough subject which allowed me to go into considerable depth when considering all of the contextual factors that affected art. On to the next point. I came into this project completely unaware of how dependent the advancement of art was on the scientific developments of the period. I thought the success of the Renaissance would just split into the scientific discoveries and the artistic developments. I was wrong. For example, in Fra Angelico's The Annunciation, this is a magnificent example of the utilization of the mathematical technique of perspective drawing. This is a technique that creates the illusion of 3D space. You can see the repeating diagonal line of the Corinthian columns on the left, the arch framing Mary, and the foreground's horizontal edging that gives the illusion of space and realism. The illusion of space gives full emphasis to the sacred area which the two inhibit. While in Northern Europe, their Renaissance was fueled by the scientific developments of Johannes Gutenberg, who invented the printing press. This led to the development of the engraving and printmaking market in Antwerp, and led to the Netherlandish technique of tulchen, you can see there. And this was painting images on cloth. This relatively cheap process made affordable art pieces more accessible to the growing middle classes. Furthermore, these scientific advances allowed many artists to provide drawings to book and print publishers. Albrecht Dürer was one of the first to publish his works in the form of woodcut prints. With mass production came the unprecedented issue of plagiarism. We can see Dürer's iconic AD monogram, and it here on the far left, and it was seen as one of the first attempts to address the problem of plagiarism. Another aspect that surprised me was the significance of the Reformation with art. With the actions of Martin Luther in 1517, anti-clerical sentiments spread across Northern Europe. French theologian John Calvin accused visual practices in Catholicism of breaking the second commandment of "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image." As a result, resistance to idolatry was far more ubiquitous up north. In the Council of Trent on the 13th of December 1545, reconciliation between the Catholic and Protestant Church proved to be impossible. As a result, there was a counter-reformation in the south, resulting in the reaffirmation of Catholic doctrine and idolatry. This return to idolization is demonstrated through the works of Carlo Dolci, such as his Madonna in Glory there. What's significant is this was painted in 1670, quite a bit of the time afterwards, which shows sort of the lasting effect of this conflict on art. Finally, on this slide, we cannot just credit the great artists of the Renaissance for the advancement of culture at this time. It was also the great patrons who provided the financial means for the creation of these masterpieces that came to define the overall artistic movement. This is what I learned myself. They had a vision and self-assurance in their achievement of progress. The incentive to commission usually expensive and time-consuming pieces ranged from immortalizing a family's legacy to philanthropy. Artists were very much limited to the demand of their clients, so didn't have much chance to express themselves, especially in the beginning of the Renaissance. One important patron that I learned of in this process was Cosimo de' Medici, who funded Donatello's David, and this was the first life-size nude sculpture since antiquity. This shows how they were equally responsible for challenging restrictions to art and pushing the boundaries in the name of artistic expression. Throughout my research process, I found myself using the opinions and analysis of prevalent art historians. I watched BBC's documentary on the Northern Renaissance, and it was presented by Harvard art historian Joseph Leo Corona. Corona provided me with an understanding of the Christian beliefs of contemporaries, enabling me to understand why art was commissioned in a certain way. To also strengthen my religious understanding of the period, which I found out was very pivotal in evaluating both the Northern and Southern Renaissances, I found religious productions useful since they had religious focus on the art they were evaluating. Sultan Light TV and the Concordian Cemetery were, I found very useful in their little videos evaluating art. Also, to fully comprehend the destructive nature of the early Christian church in undermining the standards and techniques of antiquity, I cited a few passages from Catherine Nixey's The Darkening Age. It was through this I understood the Christian fear of these works, since they believed they emulated paganism. Furthermore, various online documentaries and videos were very useful. It was initially quite difficult to ensure they were reliable, but it did get easier to spot unreliability. The School of Life and their videos were particularly helpful since they introduced me to the ideological concepts behind the Renaissance. This includes art presenting key philosophical truths and about the significance of the promotion of peace, compassion, and the best qualities of state leadership. They also had some interesting figures as well, such as Cosimo Medici, by the time of his death, having spent 250 million euros in equivalent today on taxes, buildings, charitable donations, and art. This was a substantial his was a substantial contribution to the Renaissance movement. My challenges and struggles. I struggled very much with motivation, especially near the end when I had to proofread my EPQ multiple times and it started to get a bit mundane. Thankfully, I stuck with it and I'm now very proud of my work. There are points where I got a bit overwhelmed trying to balance my EPQ with my A-levels, and I underestimated the time it took to ensure the sources you pick are reliable and relevant to your project. I got over this problem by timetabling and devoting at least 30 minutes to an hour to EPQ each day. Structuring my essay also proved to be difficult. There were points where I started to meander and my writing got less concise, but I dealt with this by taking breaks and looking back and asking for second opinions. What I've learned and taken from the process. I genuinely enjoyed writing my EPQ since it was a topic which I had been interested in and inquisitive about for a while. I leapt at the opportunity to manifest my curiosity into a research project. The project played to my strengths since I'm a humanities student and I write essays twice, maybe 3 times a week. This developed my essay writing skills and my ability to write a sustained and academic argument. I learned the skill of citing and writing a bibliography. I found the website EasyBib, which was a godsend, and I'm very grateful that I found that. I feel better prepared to go into higher education through this. I intend to pursue a field of study and perhaps even a career in law. This project has opened me up to the constant research and reading that I would have to do in university and in my career. Finally, it helped me develop my critical writing skills as well, since I had to be discriminative and evaluative in all the sources that I found. And if I got the chance to do it again, I totally would. Thank you. Oh wait, I'll just carry on presenting.
Wow, Anna May, that was absolutely sensational. I'm so pleased. I can't wait to read because I'm the lucky one that gets to read it.
Thank you,
your EPQ. So now's the time for us to think of some questions. I'm sure that this has given everyone a lot of food for thought in 2 areas. One, just how good an EPQ can be and just how good a presentation can be on EPQ. But 2, I mean, it's going to be introducing us to a topic that not all of us have ever thought about. So what questions do we have for Anna May? Unmute yourself and go for it.
What did you find like most fascinating about when you were writing your EPQ? Was it stuck out and you were like, oh gosh, I didn't know that was a...
Yeah, no, one of the things I found most fascinating was actually how significant the patrons were as well as the artists, because we all talk about Michelangelo and Donatello and how amazing their works were, but we don't realize that the ideas actually came from the people who were funding them. And if it weren't for these people, such as the Medicis, who had all this money, I really do think we wouldn't have had the Renaissance. And I think I feel like we all credit, I think, artists way too much when it's really the people with the ideas and the money as well, especially in the beginning. Another thing I found quite interesting was perhaps how significant religion was. Even if art subjects started to become a bit more secular, religion was still very prevalent, and it created a lot of division between Northern Europe and Southern Europe, and that's why we get these 2 distinct movements. So yeah, I just found that really interesting. So yeah.
Thanks.
Good question, good answer. Any more?
Yeah, I've got one. So you said you talked about how like sometimes you deviated and went on a little bit around certain topics. How did you decide like not to go down that route and investigate it further rather than focusing on what the next point was?
Yeah, no, I actually found that really hard because art is such a huge topic, and because it's so subjective, you could go on for hours and hours just writing about what you think or what other people see through this piece of art. Like I talked about in the slides before about the crucifixion and how he presents Christ suffering explicitly. In my EPQ, I remember writing a whole page just about that painting, and I realized, oh, I've spent like a quarter of my word count on that. So yeah, I tried to keep it concise, and I tried to devote small sections to a wide range of topics and movements. But yeah, it was very difficult. I definitely had to figure out what revolutionary meant and made sure like I kept to my point and make sure all the points I was making were concise and would lead to my EPQ being convincing. But yeah, it was really hard to stay on topic.
Thank you.
No problem.
I've got a question. If you were to do your EPQ again, would you build on what you've already done in this EPQ, or would you move into one of the areas that you were talking about at the beginning?
That's a hard question. I really enjoyed the breadth of my EPQ. I loved coloring all these different movements. So I don't think I wouldn't say restrict myself, because you could go very much into depth in just a small movement like literary realism versus visual realism, because it is just so much to talk about. But I just so enjoyed learning about all these different people, all these different characters, all the styles and techniques. And so I don't know, I don't think I'd reduce the amount of topics I would be covering if I went back, but I would definitely not waste as much time trying to fit everything in. If I got another chance to go back, I wouldn't be as ambitious. Like I was thinking I could cover art from antiquity to the modern movement we get today. So I would definitely be a bit more reasonable when it came to my word count.
Good afternoon. I'm going to show you a presentation today on a very famous company indeed, and that is Adidas, the sportswear brand. I think it's really interesting to see how lots of these businesses start from really, really small acorns and obviously grow into these huge businesses, and how lots of them have a really fascinating history from the start until the present day. And Adidas is absolutely no different at all. So hopefully you'll find this interesting. There's a little bit of intrigue in there, definitely some history, and definitely a few things that a lot of you won't know all about Adidas. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so Adidas. If we look at Wikipedia, what does Wikipedia say about Adidas? Well, Adidas designs and manufactures shoes, clothing, and accessories. It's the largest sportswear manufacturer in Europe and the second largest in the world after Nike. So certainly a brand that virtually everyone is aware of and probably has purchased from at some point. How did Adidas start? Well, the origins of Adidas date back to 1920 and a German town of 3,500 people. And I've practiced the name quite a few times, but I'm sure I'll get it wrong. But that town was called Herzogenaurach. The town had a background in shoes, as so many sort of small places did in those days. And this town happened to have a lot of cobblers living there. So I had 112 cobblers. But obviously after World War I, a very poverty-stricken area, and a man called Adolf, or Adi Dassler, he worked in the back of a laundry creating shoes. So he had some skills as a cobbler, but no premises of his own. And also, he had no education and no electricity for his machines. So he had to hook up an old bicycle that he had found in order for him to pedal to try and get some electricity to get his machines to be able to sew. He also had no raw materials, so really, really difficult start. Because obviously it was the end of the war, though, there were old uniforms, worn out vehicle tyres, etc., that he could use to try and construct together for shoes. Now, he really had a sort of interest from the start in sports shoes in particular. That was his passion, and obviously that's where the business would go on to flourish in the future. Harnessing his fascination for sports, Adolf simply added tacks to the sole of his shoes to try and give more grip and therefore an advantage to the wearer. So very early on, he knew that if he was to make his shoes better than other people's or other businesses, he had to add something to them to make them worthwhile. And in this case, he added tacks so there was more grip, and therefore people may be inclined to try his shoes and ultimately to buy them. 1924 was a really, really important time because his brother joined the business, Rudolf Dassler. Not only was he a skilled salesman, but he had an education. So obviously Adi, with no education whatsoever, needed someone like his brother, first and foremost, who had an education, so would understand some of the basics such as break even and the importance of workforce and those kind of key things that perhaps Adi wasn't that up to date with. His brother, as I said, was also a skilled salesman. And with his panache and his brother's shoemaking skills, they saw an increase in sales straight away. So it was very obvious from an early point that they were onto something good. We can see here that is the first sort of Adidas factory, if you like. They created Gebruder Dassler shoe fabric, which had 12 employees, including their father. And they were able to open this in 1926. So only a couple of years after his brother joined the firm, they had their first premises. So obviously things straight away on a very much an upward curve. Over the next 10 years, the business expanded. And Adi in particular went to every sporting occasion he could in Germany to try and get sportsmen and women to use his shoes. So he was very, very clever right from the start, and he knew the power, obviously, of having people using your products. So how that could improve sales, not only from people that were watching the sports events, but by getting other athletes to try and use those products as well. So German athletes wore his shoes at the 1928 and the 1932 Olympics, purely from him offering them products. And obviously product endorsement wasn't like it was, or like it is now these days. So he was offering them shoes, and in those days, if you were offered a free pair of shoes, you know, it was quite a big thing. So the likelihoods are you'd accept them and wear them, especially as the fact that the products were good. Adolf and Rudolf thought they had their big break in 1936 when the fastest man on the planet agreed to wear their shoes at the Olympics. Jesse Owens won 4 gold Olympic medals, much to the annoyance of another Adolf, Adolf Hitler. And I'm sure many of you have learnt about that in history. So Jesse Owens, ultimately Usain Bolt of his day, like we said, won 4 golds. And it's widely recognised that Adolf Dassler went into the Olympic Village and had a conversation with Jesse Owens, and through some skills of persuasion, persuaded him to wear the Adidas shoes at the Olympic Games. World War II arrived, and the business that was thriving so much ground to a halt. Rudolf and Adolf were members of the Nazi Party, although some of the reading I've done, a lot of people suggest that actually they weren't Nazis, if you like, but around that time it was actually easier just to join the Nazi Party because it gave you access to more raw materials, and it gave you greater sort of freedom as a business than if you didn't join the Nazi Party. But even being members of the Nazi Party, such as the way that the war went for Germany, in the end their factory was taken over, so shoe production stopped, and they used it to make anti-tank guns for the German government. When the war ended and the Americans arrived, they initially were going to destroy the factory. But it's claimed and recognised that Adolf Dassler's wife persuaded them not to. And one of the very plausible reasons for that put forward is actually the Jesse Owens link, because obviously the Americans, Jesse Owens was a huge, huge icon in America. And if they'd known that that's where the shoes were made, then, you know, it's very possible they would have actually stopped from blowing up that building because of that reason. In 1948, the brothers had a huge falling out. No one knows why. Lots of reasons put forward. One of the main reasons was that Rudolf spent some time in a concentration camp. People wondered whether he felt maybe his brother had actually informed on him. But no one knows why. Rudolf left the business to start his own shoe company. And from that day forward, they would never, ever talk again. And this is where it gets even more, for me, it gets even more interesting. Rudolf took some of the workforce and he started a company called Puma. So we've got 2 of the biggest sportswear and sports fashion brands coming from the same family in a small town of 3,500 people in Germany. So just shows you, you know, how tremendously talented these 2 were. To leave a company and go and start your own company, obviously is a big thing, but to have as much success as he did with Puma, I think is absolutely remarkable. So one brother had Adidas, one had Puma. So in the same town, literally you had on one side of the river, you had Puma. On the other side of the town, you had Adidas. And that is a picture from the time showing a sign in the road, one way for Puma, one for Adidas. So Adolf changed his name from the Dassler company to Adidas. And it was his nickname, Adi, and then the first 3 letters of his surname. So it's Adidas. That's how the Adidas name comes from. So it's Adi Dassler, Adolf Dassler. Now, you may have heard of the phrase bent necks. And the phrase bent necks comes from this period of time in Germany. And you'll notice that I've not tried to pronounce the name again of the German town again. And this is because there was such rivalry between the two companies that people were literally in the town would look at your footwear before deciding whether they would talk to you or acknowledge you. So you were either Adidas or Puma, okay? And you didn't speak to the other side. So it was almost like a religion in this town at the time. If you were Adidas and someone was wearing Puma, you ignored them, walked straight past them. And it says there, in many cases, this was written into your contract of employment. Obviously, contract laws weren't the same as they are today. And in that period of time after the war as well, of course, people were just very grateful to have a job, particularly having a job at companies that were being so successful. But, you know, it's not uncommon at this time for restaurants to be either a Puma restaurant or an Adidas restaurant, parks and even schools. You sent your child to an Adidas school if you were an Adidas employee. So we had Adidas on one side of the river, Puma on the other. Into the 1950s and 60s, Adidas concentrated on sports teams. So the start of their business was really creating and producing sporting goods, sporting equipment, sporting clothing. So now we think more of Adidas probably as just a commercial kind of fashion brand almost. That's where the majority of their sales come from. But in the 50s and 60s, they concentrated on sports teams. And again, particularly stars and Olympians. So here we've got Bruce Lee wearing a pair of, you can see the 3 stripes quite clearly on his trainers. So he was advertising all originals. And we've also got the Kaiser, Franz Beckenbauer, who was a captain of the German team. So he was captain in the 1966 World Cup finals, for example, and he actually was the manager when they won the World Cup in 1990. So an extremely big star, particularly obviously in Germany. Through the 1960s and 70s, Adidas went on to become one of the most famous brands in the world, with lots of iconic products and tie-ins with famous designers. Its sales in the lucrative American market dramatically increased when it started to produce casual products. And obviously, people know the brand because they've seen all these famous people wearing it. So by then offering it out to just the casual market, you're suddenly opening up the amount of people that can buy unusual products to so many more people. So you're increasing the sales. Because if you stay with just producing specialist sports equipment for the stars, you've only got a certain amount of people that can use your products. Whereas once you then have a brand that is recognizable, is respected, is liked, then when the general public can start buying it, then you have so many more people that can buy the products and spend money on them. And for example, if we look at someone like Adidas or Nike now, how many people of you watching this presentation are wearing a pair of Adidas or wearing a pair of Nike trainers? You know, there's going to be lots and lots and lots of you because we've seen the stars wearing them. Speaking of the stars wearing them, and speaking of Nike, Michael Jordan. When Michael Jordan was first in the NBA and was the rising star of the NBA, his management wanted him to do a shoe contract. Michael Jordan wanted to have a shoe contract with Adidas. He liked Adidas products. He wore Adidas stuff. Unfortunately, they approached Adidas and Adidas said that they didn't have any prototypes ready. They wouldn't have anything ready for him for a basketball boot for a period of time. So his parents persuaded him to go and see Nike. Nike at the time were not the big power that we are aware of them now. But still a big-ish company. Michael Jordan wasn't keen, didn't really want to go, but did go. And eventually he signed for Nike. Now, Nike were hoping in the first year of sales for, I think it was $3 million worth of sales of the Michael Jordan product. They got $125 million. So that goes to show you how popular that product was. And obviously everyone's heard of Air Jordan. A lot of people continue to buy Air Jordan products to this day. So a huge mistake from Adidas. However, Adidas have produced many iconic shoes. And I thought it would be interesting just to show you some of the different kind of products that Adidas do or have done. So they're very big on doing tie-ins with famous or other famous brands and with famous designers. So you can see that we've got a Kermit the Frog Adidas trainer. They also had a tracksuit top that came out with that. And also Miss Piggy had her own line as well. We can see on the other side, Mr. Happy. And again, Mr. Happy had a tracksuit top as well. I did own a pair of Mr. Happy Adidas trainers at one point. And in the middle is one of their more kind of bizarre tie-ins. They've done an awful lot of products with someone called Jeremy Scott, who's quite a well-known fashion designer, who has produced some seriously interesting products, shall we say. I haven't owned a pair of those, but if you do Google Adidas Jeremy Scott, you'll see that he did all sorts of very, very interesting tie-ins with Adidas. There's some quite crazy stuff. More recently, of course, we've got Stella McCartney. So the Adidas still produce things with the Stella McCartney fashion house, the iconic Stan Smiths, and on the right there we have the Adidas Hacienda trainer. And this was released, and this is my personal favorite actually, but they're too expensive to buy should you ever be able to even find a pair on eBay, because they haven't produced them for a long time. And this was launched to celebrate the famous Hacienda nightclub in Manchester. And when you bought it, they were wrapped in paper, and the paper had the plans for the Hacienda building on it, and it came on a piece of wooden tile, which was purportedly a piece of tile from the dance floor, that sort of thing. So a really cool tie-in. Over the years, the brothers hated each other. They sued each other many times for copyright, because obviously shoes are very similar, copying each other's ideas. It was not uncommon for them to be in court. But both brothers died in the 1970s. And although they're buried in the same cemetery, back in the original German town, it is true that they are buried at opposite ends of the cemetery, as far away as possible from each other. So again, that just goes to show the levels of hatred that they had amongst themselves to the end of their lives. In terms of success, well, if we're looking probably at the sizes of the business, it's fair to say Adidas is a bigger business. So Adidas currently has approximately 39,000 employees. Puma currently has 9,000. Adidas, though, has had its struggles. So in the 80s, the business lost direction, and also customers to companies like Nike and even to Reebok, especially in the lucrative North American market. This culminated in bankruptcy after losing $80 million, and Nike was sold out of the original family to a totally different business, which was I think it was a number of people that sort of grouped together to buy Nike. In the 1990s, they were saved when they decided to move production to Asia, drastically increasing profit margins. And of course, as soon as they went to Asia, it means that the cost of production was a lot cheaper, because the workers were a lot cheaper. So they could make a lot more products for a lot less money. They still have offices in the original German town, but the offices are much more kind of executive, marketing, that sort of thing, much, much smaller than they were beforehand. But even if you go back to that town now, there are a number of statues of Adi Dassler to remember him. They did so well in 2005, they bought one of their previous competitors, Reebok. And in 2015, they bought a fitness tech company called Runtastic, which is now named Adidas Running, for $240 million. They also bought well-known golf brands such as TaylorMade, which they did later sell, and Maxifly, so they could compete with Nike Golf. And of course, at the time, they needed to compete with Nike Golf because Nike Golf had Tiger Woods signed to them. So it was a way for them to try and keep up with Nike and try and make sure that their brand was as important to people. Now, there is a little bit on the logos, because Adidas have got 4 different logos. So they're quite unique in terms of their logos, because they don't give up an old logo. So many brands you'll see will update their logos, and then you'll just see the new version of the logo on their products, and the old one will become obsolete. Whereas Adidas, they don't give up their old logos. So at the top, we can see there the 3 stripes, and originally the 3 stripes actually was put onto the products, the Adidas products, as really it was to make them more durable. So it was actually a way of keeping the shoe together. So by putting crossbars on the shoe, it was a way of keeping it as strong as possible, because remember, they weren't necessarily using at the start the best materials that they could do, but they kept those 3 stripes, and those 3 stripes obviously become extremely iconic. The next one that we've got really, again, is one that we should know, and all of them actually are pretty well known. And that all shows, the second one is showing about sort of climbing the mountain, getting to the top, and also overcoming challenges. The third one has again the 3 stripes of Adidas in, and then at the top it's got what they call a trefoil emblem, and this symbolises the company's focus on variety. And also the leaves originally were there to stand for the 3 continents of the world where you could buy the products at that time, which was North America, Europe and Asia. And finally, we have the round emblem, and that stands for the globe and the fast adaptation to changes that Adidas feel that they have created over a period of time. Okay, I hope that you have found this interesting and mildly educational. I think it's a fascinating business with quite a lot of sort of history, intrigue, arguments, Nazi parties, all sorts of different things thrown in to actually create a brand which a lot of people use today and think is really, really, really good. Thank you for your time.